So each year I get an opportunity to kind of speak and provide some words, and so we've titled this talk this morning, "What's Your Story?" So it's early morning. The sun has yet to come up in Worthington, Ohio, and I'm sitting in my living room with my laptop balanced on my lap. I've got a fresh cup of coffee. The steam is still rising off of it. It's a Pete's Major Dickinson's dark brew coffee, and it's deep black in my mug. It's my first cup of the day. Doreen and our girls, they're still asleep, and so this is the time of day where I can read and write and really just try to focus and get a head start on my day. My old, beat-up iPhone 7 is sitting on our kitchen counter, maybe 5 to 7 feet away. It vibrates. Because while I did silence it, it's never really turned off. The vibration causes a reflexive response in my brain and creates a little bit of anxiousness. I mean, I've got to check it, right? I mean, what if it's an emergency? What if transportation has an issue? Or what if the power is out at one of our schools and the power is seemingly always out at one of our schools? So I set my laptop to the side and I get up to go to the kitchen. I check my phone. I pound out a quick response to the text message, but I decide to leave my phone on our kitchen counter. I do pour myself a little more coffee because I like my coffee hot. And I sit back down with my computer. But I'm having trouble focusing. I'm having trouble getting back to my train of thought. And so, I decide I'll just check my Twitter feed. I mean, in my mind, I'll just check my Worthington schools list and see what happened the night before. And while I'm doing that, I come across some sports scores. And, for whatever reason, I click on an article about Buckeye football recruiting. 15 minutes passes before I look up. I mean, at this point, I might as well check my Facebook, right? Wish people happy birthday to start the day. And, then my phone buzzes again. And my watch tells me it's probably just my weather app. But, I got to check it, right? Facebook, Twitter, text messages, my weather app. You can't get away from it. Not even to get to our never-ending email. The harm here is not just the numbing effects of technology. Statistics show that we as Americans, we consume something like 10 hours of media a day, 100,000 words, 34 gigabytes. Guys, I've turned the screen time function off on my iPhone because I've decided I don't want to know. And I rationalize that much of it's probably work-related, but that's probably not true. We're under a constant barrage of the trivial, the urgent, the heartbreaking, the traumatic, and the buffoonish. And much of it is unfiltered, unexplained, unproven, and certainly unworthy of our attention. But I can't stop. In the book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain, the author Nicholas Carr recounts numerous conversations with really bright men and women. And they all explain the same similar phenomena, the noticeable deterioration of their attention span. They're struggling to read books or articles. They're struggling with long blog posts or even things that are awesome, like the Evening Street School newsletter. The author explains that the internet is not just reshaping how we take in information. It's actually, in some cases, altering the structure of our brains. We don't want to focus on anything for very long, and we're addicted to the quick, short stimulus response of our mobile devices. Guys, you work with kids. You see this every day. But if we're honest, it's happening to us too. We're addicted to distraction. We're addicted to the likes or the feedback that we get on our social media posts, and we revel in the groupthink of the Facebook groups that we've joined. Technology has been slowly changing who we are and how we interact for some time. And then the pandemic hit. Social distancing, quarantine, stay-at-home orders, health department recommendations. Guys, who even knew what health department Worthington Schools was part of before this pandemic? I'd been the superintendent for 6 years, and I wasn't totally sure. But I am now. Virtual learning, hybrid learning, co-curricular shutdowns, Zoom meetings. In March of 2020, when the shutdown first occurred, I really never questioned it. We were flattening the curve. Every afternoon, I would tune in to Governor DeWine and Amy Acton's press conference for information, and I honestly think for at least the first few weeks, it was somewhat of a novelty. Our calendar went from 1,000 miles an hour to 0. We spent more time together as a family. We took more walks. We played more games. In our house, we ordered more Grubhub, right? But by July of last year, we were expected to have a plan in place for the new school year. And if you remember, it started as red, yellow, green. Things like remaining virtual as much as possible, keeping our distance, wearing masks, they seemed like no-brainers to me. But by August of last year, our community was clearly split on the right path forward. And to an extent, we remain so today. You know, some would argue that physical safety from COVID was our highest priority. And in order to have the most amount of physical safety, we needed to implement the most number of restrictions that we could. Others would argue that physical safety from COVID was important, but they were concerned about the effects of social isolation, and therefore they felt like much of life should go on as normal in person. As superintendent, I thought, well, hopefully I can navigate a middle ground, but conflicting information was the norm. It came from all sides, and you know, everybody knew somebody who was a doctor, and they knew exactly what we should do. So there was seemingly no middle ground. And then things became toxic. At one point last year, I deleted my social media because no matter what I posted, I was accosted with threats, told I was stupid, told I was toxically positive. People on both sides of the issue told me that because of my decisions, people would die and I would have blood on my hands. I didn't really want to visit schools last year because a segment of you was also frustrated and angry with the decisions that were in place. And my colleagues at the WEC weren't a lot better, as they too often disagreed on the right path forward. It became unsafe for Doreen, my wife, just to take walks in the neighborhood with friends, because association with people on one side or the issue or the other made people believe they knew how our family felt about the issue. And if you didn't agree with how we felt about the issue, we were going to be demonized on social media or sometimes in the grocery store. You know, late last fall, we allowed our girls, Peyton, Campbell, and Riley, to go visit their grandparents in the state of Florida. We weren't sure it was a good idea or not. We talked about it for a while, and in the end, for the mental health of my mom, we allowed the girls to go. And people that I once thought were my friends and people that were always great to me face to face called for my resignation on social media because they said I wasn't taking COVID seriously enough. Guys, I grew up here. But during this pandemic, people that I've known for 15 to 30 years have called us names, threatened to sue us, and generally have made it unsafe for our family. Technology and the pandemic had combined to create a toxic culture in Worthington and in every community around us. So I'm sharing my experience with you because it's what I know, but it was toxic for you too. How you thought about the restrictions, how those decisions impacted people that you love, how you viewed people that disagreed with you, how you interacted with others on social media, what you read or what you didn't read. Guys, this pandemic, it changed how we viewed colleagues. It damaged long-term relationships. And it's created an anxiety that still lingers for many of us today. The struggle to balance literal survival with all the things that make surviving worthwhile has never really been so clear, with the pandemic forcing all of us to sacrifice social connections, therefore quality of life, for life itself. And we know that social isolation and loneliness were prevalent in our culture long before COVID-19. But what we're learning is that our well-intentioned efforts to reduce the virus's spread likely have exacerbated this issue. Statistics show that within the first month of our COVID shutdowns, loneliness increased something like 20 to 30%, and emotional distress actually tripled. Obviously, studies are ongoing to figure out the full extent of this issue, but it seems reasonable to believe that the pre-existing public health crisis of social isolation and loneliness is now far more widespread. And we know in our school district, this has been most difficult for our older students, our adolescents and our teens. The social drive as a teenager, the need to connect with your peers, is so intense. And we know that their impulse control has not been fully developed. And so we see that our teens are making really poor choices. Social isolation for our teens presents unique risk, first to their mental health, and then, by extension, to their physical well-being. Guys, I want you to know that you were amazing last year. Like, I'm in awe of your hard work and your dedication and the teaching and learning that actually occurred in this incredibly disjointed school year. I will personally always be grateful for your incredible efforts. But because of your efforts, while learning did occur, technology has lulled many of us into a feeling of false connection. Technology seems to connect us more than ever before, but it actually disconnects us. It disconnects us from nature, from ourselves, and from our peers. And this is a really hard truth for me to acknowledge. But Wi-Fi alone is not enough to fulfill our social needs. We need connection and community. Our students need connection and community. It's why we're here today. We need to be in the same room. We need to feel the same emotions. Simply, we were made to be together. We all know that a baby who is not held enough in their infancy will quickly devolve into a failure to thrive. That human touch is so important. In 2011, scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, did a study on NBA teams, National Basketball Association teams. And it turns out that study showed that the teams that touched one another more actually won more games. A pat on the back, a high five after a positive play, a fist bump, and a hug. Now, in our culture today, and certainly in public education, we know we have to be really careful about who we touch, how we touch, etc. But the simple truth is the same. We were made to be together. So what does all this mean for Worthington schools? As we begin a new school year tomorrow, I believe we have a moral obligation to do everything we can to connect with our students, to connect our students with one another, and to reconnect with our community. Last year, every year, we give our Panorama Social Emotional Learning Survey. But when we gave that survey last year, it told us that we had a significant drop in our students' sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is our students' connection to school and to one another. Now, that data doesn't surprise us, not with the disjointed school year and the restrictions that were in place. But each year, when we give that data, it seems to tell us that we as adults believe we really know our students. But our students tell us they're not sure we really do know them. Some of that's likely the adolescent brain and their developing minds, but as an organization, how do we combat that? In Worthington schools, we believe that each child should have a trusted adult or many trusted adults who they know care about them and believe in them. No matter what your job function, our first job, whether you're a teacher or a paraprofessional, whether you work in the office, whether you work in the kitchen or are a bus driver or are a custodian, or whether you're part of our landscape maintenance team, our first job is to get to know our students, to make sure our students know that we care about them and that we believe in their potential to grow and learn and to be successful. That's our first job. So with that in mind, the question we want everybody to ask this year is, what's your story? See, everybody has a story. Everybody has a lived experience that has shaped how they see the world. 6 years ago, I stood on this very stage, and I shared part of my story with those of you that were here about growing up in Worthington as a student in our special education program identified with a specific learning disability. If you weren't here 6 years ago, that talk's available on our Worthington Schools YouTube page, but would you have known that part of my story if I didn't share it with you? You know, it's easy to see somebody's social media highlights and believe we know about their story. Some of us in this room were connected on Facebook, and so you'll see our vacation photos. They're idyllic, right? Our family is usually on a beach somewhere, and everybody is smiling. But the picture doesn't show you the 11-hour drive to the beach. The picture doesn't show you me yelling at everybody in our house like a lunatic to get packed and in the car so that we can leave at 3:30 in the morning and beat the traffic. That's a true story. The picture doesn't show you the ants that took over the counter of the beach house we rented, or the wind blowing the sand into our face on the North Carolina beach. The picture doesn't show you the 98% humidity, or the fact that I had ice cream from Beaches and Cream every night on vacation and didn't exercise even once. The picture only shows you what I want you to see. And much of our life is like that. I see the successes of those that I work with, but I brush over the real life stuff. I may not know about your financial struggles at home, or the death of a parent, or the betrayal of a spouse. I may know a little bit about it, but I brush over it. But everybody has a story. Everybody has a lived experience that's shaped them, changed them, and continues to affect them. Tomorrow, almost 11,000 students will walk into our Worthington schools. And every one of those students has a story. When you see those students, you'll likely know part of their story. The part of their story you think you know will shape your expectations for that student. The part of their story that you think you know will shape whether you give mercy and grace on an assignment or whether you hold steadfast to your expectations. But when we know more, we do more. When we really know someone's story, it changes everything. It changes how we think. It changes how we interact. It changes what we expect. Everybody has a story, but not everybody has someone to listen to that story. Technology has changed how we think and how we interact. The pandemic has created a level of social isolation that is real, but we know we're not made to be behind a computer screen. Technology and the pandemic, they've combined over the last year to create a toxic culture. But in Worthington schools, tomorrow we're back. We know we need to be together. We know that our students need connection and community. I'm convinced that the path forward is in person and in meaningful relationship. If each child in Worthington schools is really going to have a trusted adult who they know cares about them and believes in them, then each of us has to commit to know the story of those we serve. And each of us has to commit to be the person who listens to our kids face to face. There are 1,325 adults who commit to working every day in this school district. Collectively, if we each make that commitment, we will create the school communities that our students deserve and that we as a staff desire for one another. So that's our question for the year. What's your story? And will you be the person that listens? Guys, we want you to have a great, great school year in Worthington. We need you to go be awesome. Have a great, great year.